Welcome back to another FPL video and podcast. I'll be covering the best differentials in Fantasy Premier League, and there were several discussed in the best budget players. I think those two sections do intertwine, but I'll be covering even more today. Every single player will have less than 10% ownership, and some of them have far less than that at around 1% or even lower. Smash the like button and subscribe if you're new if you enjoy my content. Let's try to get this video to the 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards new goals like 30,000 subscribers. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below, especially if you want your teams to feature in the rating your teams video that's coming right up. You can take a screenshot on the browser or app and be sure to send it to me on Twitter, Instagram, or the Discord server. All the links are in the description below, including Draft Town, which you can see on screen on YouTube. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. I'll kick things off with the goalkeepers as usual, and Muric is a great differential. He averaged more points per game than any goalkeeper in FPL last season. There was a far smaller sample size, but in terms of saves and bonus points, not many were better than Muric, who did very well for Burnley despite the relegation. And since his move to Ipswich Town, he has started the last two games in the friendlies, and one of which was a 1-0 victory. And yes, they did lose to Fortuna Dusseldorf 2-1, but Ipswich Town have been fairly decent over the course of the summer with two 1-0 wins in these friendlies. And Muric is probably the best way of covering Ipswich Town defensively, but you also have Davis, who I covered in the best budget players. He got 18 assists last season, so I think it's between those two to cover Ipswich Town defensively. Apart from that, I wouldn't really consider them, even though Johnson is a 4 million option for you if you want to go for a cheap fifth defender. But Muric comes in at 0.3% ownership, no clean sheets for Burnley last season, but he still made 64 saves, got 47 FPL points and 12 bonus points, which is a staggering figure for a 4 million goalkeeper from last season, now at 4.5. The opening two fixtures are terrible to say the least. We're Liverpool at home and Man City away. It's a baptism of fire for Ipswich Town, but the fixtures afterwards look better, and I think Muric is still a very solid choice in this position. Some FPL managers will fall under a bit of a trap and go for Ward or Iverson, just like they did 2 years ago, and there was a slight period in that season where Ward offered great value, but for most of that campaign it was very frustrating, and ultimately Leicester got relegated. They conceded so many goals and Ward just didn't really deliver on the hype and ownership that he had. But Hermansen is the number one pick for Leicester City nowadays. He was in the last campaign where Leicester City won the championship, and the last two friendlies, which were 1-0 defeats to Palermo and Augsburg, Hermansen started those matches, and that's going to be the case from Game Week 1 onwards. He has 0.6% ownership and he's worth considering, but I'll be completely honest, I'd much rather go for Wout Faes or Vestergaard at 0.5 million cheaper, and at the same price you can go for Ricardo Pereira, who used to be priced at 5.5 to 6 million a few years ago due to the attacking potential mainly from assists. But Hermansen is worth considering. He kept 13 clean sheets in the championship last season, making over 100 saves, and the goals prevented figure was quite impressive at 4.68. He also saved the only penalty that he faced, so that's very impressive as well. The opening fixtures aren't necessarily that enticing, but afterwards, from Game Week 5 and beyond, Leicester City have a good fixture run, and Hermansen is not a bad option in goal. I was very close to putting Vicario in the players to avoid list, but I've gone for him in the differential section instead because he has the saves potential and he can get good bonus points. But with the changes to the bonus point system, which isn't favourable for goalkeepers, not just Vicario but even Muric might be less appealing than they were a year ago. So it's still not my favourite pick. And from Spurs, you've got Van der Ven at 4.5 million and Pedro Porro at 5.5. Even Romero is probably a better FPL option than Vicario, so he's not really at the top of my priorities, but he could be a solid choice. He had a good campaign to start things off with his Tottenham career, but he has a few weaknesses in his game which can be exploited. And really, if Spurs keep more clean sheets than the 7 they kept with Vicario in goal last season, then he could actually be a very solid choice here because he's still got over 100 FPL points with only 7 clean sheets, which isn't a very impressive figure. Over 100 saves once again and 9 bonus points, all of which are very decent numbers. His ownership is also 5.1%. The opening two games look good. I think one clean sheet is possible, but beyond that, Spurs have some very tough fixtures, and I wouldn't want to start Vicario against Newcastle or Arsenal. Rico Henry was far more popular at this time last year, but unfortunately early in the campaign he picked up an ACL injury and missed most of the season, and that's why all of the numbers you see on screen are very low. a 4.5 million price tag, less than 1% ownership, no goals, just 1 assist and 1 yellow card, and 13 FPL points. The opening 4 game weeks don't look great either, with Liverpool and Man City away, 2 of the toughest fixtures you can ask for, but I still think Rico Henry is worth considering, and he's the joint best way of covering Brentford defensively, alongside Flecken in goal. Most FPL managers will go for Konsa if they want to cover Aston Villa defensively, but at the same price, you've got Pau Torres, who is almost just as nailed. You could argue that Konsa is slightly more, because he can play 2 positions at centre-back and right back, whilst Pau Torres is more limited in terms of versatility. But with 2 goals and 0 assists, I'd still argue Pau Torres has more goal threat than Konsa, who got 1 goal and 1 assist, and I covered him in the best budget players video and podcast. But the most impressive stat of them all for Pau Torres is just 1 yellow card, and he started quite a significant number of games with 27. Now, if he can start 30 plus, I think he can get into the 100 plus FPL points territory, and that makes him one of the best differentials and budget players on offer. The opening fixtures are also great for Aston Villa, with the exception of Arsenal at home in Game Week 2, but last season it was a 1-0 victory for Aston Villa at Villa Park. Although it won't be to the same degree, Castagna versus Robinson is quite similar to Pau Torres versus Konsa, where one player is significantly more popular and discussed than the other. Now, my main issue with Castagna is he has bigger competition from Tete at right back compared to Robinson at left back, but Fulham have made some signings in those positions, so you could expect some rotation there, and Robinson has more assists for it. He actually got assists in the last 2 preseason friendlies, so that could also be another deciding factor, but Castagna is still worth considering, with 1 goal and 3 assists last season, 8 bonus points and 105 FPL points as well, 3.3% ownership and good opening fixtures, particularly Leicester at home and West Ham at home, and even Ipswich Town away could be a clean sheet for Fulham. Newcastle United are heavily linked with a move to Mark Gay, and I think if that move happens, you could see Fabian Schär and Gay as the main centre-back partnership until Botman comes back, and that puts Dan Burn further down the pecking order as the 3rd to 4th choice centre-back, and also potentially the 2nd choice left-back. I believe Lewis Hall will start most games at left back this season and get far more game time, and also with it will come assists and goals, and I think Lewis Hall could be a breakout differential. He currently has 0.9% ownership with a very low price tag, of course, 1 goal and no assist last season with 3 bonus points and only 38 FPL points overall, but we could see all of these numbers doubling or tripling this season, and to start this campaign I think Lewis Hall is worth a punt, but of course Dan Burn would be seen generally as the more safe pick, but that isn't necessarily the case if Mark Gay moves to Newcastle United and displaces Dan Burn at centre-back. Lewis Dunk is right up there as one of the highest scoring defenders in the last couple of years in terms of pure goals, not necessarily about FPL points, but only Gabriel can really rival Lewis Dunk in terms of goal threat for a centre-back, and Dunk still got 3 goals last season with 1 assist and 33 shots, all of which are very impressive stats for a centre-back, and he got 89 FPL points. He could easily get over 100 if he starts 30 plus games and can stay injury free. His ownership is 4.2%. You've got Barco, who's the talk of the town, with a 4 million price tag, but Lewis Dunk will be a safer pick throughout most of this season. Tyrick Mitchell scored in a 3-1 win over West Ham in their recent preseason friendly, but his 5 million price tag will be enough to put most FPL managers off. You've got Munoz at 5 million as well, and he has more attacking potential and bonus points, and you've also got Joachim Andersen, who is a complete steal at 4.5 million, not to mention Dean Henderson, who I covered in the best budget players video, coming in at 4.5 million, but Mitchell is still a very underrated pick, and that's why his ownership is 2.5%. He got 2 goals and 3 assists in the last campaign with 10 bonus points and 119 FPL points overall, very similar to Anderson, but that 0.5 million extra will make most people go for the Danish centre-back instead. But Mitchell is still a great option at left-back, and despite the 5 million price tag, he's still worth considering for your FPL teams. I really should have said Danish, but moving on to Malo Gusto, I'm not as convinced about him now as I was a few weeks ago, and Chelsea have looked very suspect defensively during pre-season. Against Man City, for example, they concede a goal, then immediately afterwards they concede yet again, and that happened on 2 occasions in that 4-2 defeat. They also lost 2-1 to Real Madrid, and they lost 4-1 to Celtic, an absolute demolition there. The only comprehensive performance and victory was against Club America, a 3-0 win, but apart from that, they haven't won any other pre-season game, and with Reece James suspended due to that red card he got towards the end of last season, that paves the way for Gusto to be nailed on for the first few game weeks of this season. But if Chelsea don't get their act together defensively, I'm not so sure if Gusto would still remain on this list for the best differentials. But game weeks 2 to 8 look fantastic in terms of fixtures. Game week 1, of course, is something you want to avoid, and I wouldn't recommend starting Gusto. Despite the attacking potential, you could have a very high scoring game there as well. But Gusto got 6 assists last season and 10 bonus points, which is quite impressive. 74 FPL points as well. His ownership is only 3%. He's worth considering, but honestly, at the moment, I'm not so sure about Chelsea in this position, and I might want to avoid all other assets, including Robert Sanchez in goal. Harvey Elliott has started every single game during pre-season, and Liverpool have looked very impressive. A 1-0 win over Real Betis. They also beat Arsenal 2-1 and thrashed Man United 3-0, even though the overall balance of play was quite even in my opinion. But Harvey Elliott comes in at 5.5 million with 1.7% ownership, and in just 11 starts last season, he got 3 goals and 9 assists. Of course, some of these goal contributions came off the bench, so of course this stat might be a bit misleading, but I think with more starts, and Harvey Elliott could get 20 plus potentially under the new manager Arne Slot, he could easily get over 100 FPL points, and Liverpool are top of the fixture difficulty rating for the first 8 game weeks of this season. So Harvey Elliott could be one of the best Liverpool assets, and he comes in at such a cheap price point. Emil Smith-Rowe scored against Sevilla in that 2-1 defeat, assisted by Robinson, and that was a great start to his Fulham career. Even though it's just a friendly, it's a good way to get him going ahead of game week 1 against Manchester United away from home, which won't be easy, but Fulham's fixtures are still quite good over the first 8 game weeks of this season, and Smith-Rowe's ownership has surged. It was around 0.3% whilst he was at Arsenal, but following his move to Fulham, that's really increased the appeal and attention on Emil Smith-Rowe, who has so much potential. If he can stay injury-free, he could easily get double digits in terms of goals and assists combined, with maybe close to 10 goals and a handful of assists as well. Last season, he didn't score a single goal for Arsenal, but he got 2 assists and 15 shots, which was quite impressive considering the very limited game time that he got. 25 FPL points is also not that impressive, but he did do quite well a few years ago when he was starting consistently for Arsenal as a left winger. So keep an eye out for Smith-Rowe. He's going to be a nailed-on starter for Fulham this season, and he's got so much talent that he could easily become a great option at 5.5 million. I covered Hutchinson in the best budget players video on podcast, and his ownership is around 1%, and Chaplin is both a differential and budget player. So as I mentioned, both of those segments and categories do intertwine, but Chaplin has even lower ownership at 0.4%. He's also priced at 5.5 million, and he was very impressive in the Championship last season with 13 goals and 8 assists, and the underlying stats were quite impressive as well, with an XG figure of 11.97 and 13 big chances created. The big put-off will be the first 2 game weeks of the season against Liverpool and Man City, but beyond that, I'd highly recommend Chaplin as your 5th midfielder, rotating with a 3rd striker like João Pedro, Jamie Vardy or Armstrong. Dewsbury Hall got an assist in a 3-0 win over Club America in a recent pre-season friendly, and he was one of the best players in the Championship last season with 12 goals, 14 assists, 2 penalties won, and 20 big chances created. Those are some incredible numbers there for a 6 million midfielder who has less than 1% ownership. Game week 1 is an avoid, but from game weeks 2 to 8, I think Dewsbury Hall could be a fantastic budget midfielder for your FPL teams. And whilst Nkunku and Palmer are my preferences for the Chelsea attack, especially in the midfield, I would argue that Dewsbury Hall is the 3rd best midfielder that Chelsea have to offer. The hope with McAllister is that he doesn't play in defensive midfield for most of the upcoming season. He can play very well there, but he can also play as a number 10 and as a box-to-box midfielder, and even as a left-sided midfielder, which he has done on multiple occasions for Argentina. Now, Liverpool's fixtures are fantastic. I think McAllister will get 30 plus starts this season, but there's also the Champions League to contend with, so you could see some rotation with these Liverpool midfielders, and that could give the likes of Harvey Elliott more game time. And as things stand, I would recommend Harvey Elliott more than Alexis McAllister, but we could see the Argentine second in command for penalties just behind Mohamed Salah. And to be honest, I personally think McAllister is a better penalty taker, and that is backed up by the stats because he's got a very impressive track record from the penalty spot. With 5 goals and 5 assists last season, he did very well for Liverpool overall, but for Brighton we all saw they can easily get to 10 plus goals in a Premier League season with the penalty duties allocated to him. Towards the end of last season, we saw Harvey Barnes and Gordon coexisting in the same starting 11, and with Callum Wilson heavily linked with a move away, we might see less of Isak on the wing, and instead he's going to start every single game up front with Barnes and Gordon on the wings, and there are some rumours of Gordon leaving the club as well. But if that was the case, that only opens the door for Harvey Barnes to be nailed on for Newcastle United week in, week out, and he'd definitely become one of the best differentials in the game. He got 5 goals and 3 assists last season despite being injured for large parts of it. Only 7 starts and 64 FPL points, but I think Harvey Barnes could become a very popular choice at one stage this season, and it will far exceed the 0.6% ownership that we currently see for him. The 6.5 million price tag is also very generous. I know it's deserved based on last season, but he's got the potential to easily outperform those at 7.5 million and above. Bruno Guimaraes is always linked with a move away, but recently it was reported that he will stay at Newcastle for at least one more season, and he's very overlooked in FPL, just 3% ownership after getting 7 goals, 9 assists, 15 bonus points, and over 150 FPL points. These are staggering numbers for a 6.5 million midfielder who always kind of delivers. He ticks along nicely. There's the odd game where he gets a massive return between 12 to 15 points, and he can do that once again, especially with some of the fixtures coming up in the first 4 game weeks of this campaign, with Bournemouth away from home in game week 2, Southampton at home in game week 1 is one of the best fixtures you can ask for, and Wolves away in game week 4. Don't even discount the Tottenham fixture, because Newcastle have a great record at St James's Park against the Lily Whites in recent campaigns, and Bruno Guimaraes is an excellent penalty taker as well. Leon Bailey has already scored in pre-season, but Aston Villa have really struggled in recent pre-season matches with 3 consecutive losses, but I still think Leon Bailey will be a solid choice in the upcoming season. He got 10 goals and 11 fantasy assists and 148 FPL points overall, but I could see some rotation happening with the Champions League and Premier League balance that has to be struck by Unai Emery, and Leon Bailey can get a few injury problems, and sometimes his minutes are extensively managed, so I think we could see a reduction in some of these numbers, especially in terms of goals, assists and FPL points, but the underlying numbers are quite decent. His XGI was 13.46, and at 6.5 million he's still one of the best options in the game. But of course, for Aston Villa offensively, Ollie Watkins is always the dream way of covering the Villains' attack, but Leon Bailey is still probably the second best choice they have on offer, even with Morgan Rogers rising to the surface. Jeremy Doku was just shy of hitting 100 FPL points in his debut Premier League campaign with 10 fantasy assists, 3 goals, 13 bonus points and 98 FPL points overall. His ownership is 3.1%, and he had a decent Premier League campaign considering it was his debut season. So I think Doku has a lot of qualities about him. The pace combined with the dribbling are certainly electrifying, and when he's on his day, he could cause problems to any fullback in the Premier League, and Game Week 2 against Ipswich Town at home looks like a fantastic proposition if Doku gets the start, and I think he'll get even more minutes this season and potentially be one of their most nailed on wingers. But you've got Jack Grealish, who's been quite impressive in pre-season, and Oscar Bob, who has been the star of the show in my opinion for Man City, alongside Erling Haaland as well. But Jeremy Doku should still get a lot of game time and get more starts this season, and he could easily get to 10 assists once again and potentially add even more goals to his collection. Bernardo Silva is a very underrated player, not just in FPL, but also across world football, and the price reduction to 6.5 million still hasn't really attracted many FPL owners with only 2.8% ownership. 6 goals and 9 assists are good numbers considering his price tag, and 20 bonus points is a standout stat, and that's one of his biggest strengths, and that's why he consistently gets over 100 FPL points. 141 in the last campaign is certainly very impressive. City's fixtures are quite mixed bag overall, you could argue, but FPL and their fantasy website do have a very favourable outlook in terms of the FDR for the first 10 game weeks of the season. Chelsea away might not look great on paper, but with the way they're defending in pre-season, I think Bernardo Silva and all these Man City midfielders and attackers can get a lot of joy, and it wouldn't surprise me if they scored 4 goals at Stamford Bridge once again. While Matoma hasn't changed in price, I think the circumstances have certainly changed, because he was a template pick at this time last year and now his ownership is 1.8% with 3 goals and 7 assists in the last campaign, despite missing most of it due to injury. He also got 34 shots, which was quite impressive considering the limited game time, and 74 FPL points, and I could see a resurgence for Mitoma. He can get to 100 plus FPL points once again, as he did in the season before last, and I think Mitoma is one of the best dribblers in the Premier League, and if he can combine that with his creativity and also his eye for goal, we could be looking at a very good FPL asset at 6.5 million. For the first 3 game weeks of this season, I think Morgan Gibbs-White is an excellent choice. He's not the biggest differential because his ownership is over 7%, but it's still quite good all things considered, and any returns he provides will definitely shoot you up the ranks and also help you win your mini leagues. He got 5 goals and 12 assists last season with 16 big chances created and 142 FPL points, so I think he's an excellent choice at 6.5 million. But you've also got Elanga, Hudson-Odoi and even Chris Wood up front to contend with, and I wouldn't mind a double up in Nottingham Forest defensively for the first 3 game weeks, but only for that period, because after that you've got Liverpool away and some tougher games later down the road. But Morgan Gibbs-White should tick along nicely for the rest of this campaign, and he's also very nailed on with some set piece duties, and he's probably one of the most underrated players in the Premier League. Amongst midfielders, I would argue that Hwang Hee-chan has the biggest eye for goal from anyone who's priced at 6.5 million or below. The biggest drawback is the opening fixtures with Arsenal, Chelsea and Newcastle, but I would argue that Chelsea could be a very good fixture for the attackers considering how they've been defending in pre-season, and it might take them some time to bed into Maresca's tactics, which still might cause some issues, especially playing out from the back. But Hwang Hee-chan is an excellent finisher. He had 15 big chances last season, over 120 FPL points and 12 goals. Very impressive stats. Yeah, his ownership is only 1.4%, so I'd highly recommend Hwang Hee-chan even over Pedro Neto and other Wolves midfielders. Dominic Szoboszlai scored Liverpool's first goal in pre-season in that 1-0 victory over Real Betis. It was assisted by Mohamed Salah, and we could see Szoboszlai play a more offensive role, similar to what he does for Hungary, and he has an excellent record for the national team. He had a great start to the last campaign, but slowly he died down, especially FPL-wise, with only 3 goals and 4 assists, 60 shots and 99 FPL points, just 1 shy from the Centurion mark, and that's why his ownership is so low at 2.7%. But the opening fixtures are there. We could see a lot of rotation in some of these positions. McAllister is yet to come back. You've got Harvey Elliott being very impressive and Szoboszlai, but I could see all 3 of them coexisting in the same midfield, and Szoboszlai improving upon all of these numbers and getting over 100 FPL points with ease. Heung-min Son remains the best Spurs midfielder you can go for, but to start this season, if you want to go for someone a bit cheaper, I think Brennan Johnson provides a decent choice in this position with 1.8% ownership and a price tag of 6.5 million. And some of his underlying numbers are terrific, like 22 big chances, but his finishing is very poor as he only scored 5 times last season, but he did get 12 assists as a consolation to ultimately provide 131 FPL points overall. The first 2 game weeks look great for Brennan Johnson and co, but I wouldn't recommend any of these players for game weeks 3, 4 and possibly beyond. You'd want a more prolonged fixture run for Spurs before investing in their assets in the long term. Raheem Sterling scored against his former club in that 4-2 defeat to Manchester City. He comes in at 7 million with a lot of FPL pedigree over the years with Liverpool and Man City, where he produced so many returns, 150 plus FPL points on a consistent basis, sometimes exceeding the 200 mark, which is very impressive. But last season, only 8 goals and 8 assists. He got a massive return against Burnley early on in the season and also against Luton Town, but that still wasn't enough to really make up for the disappointing 123 FPL points, which is still decent, but Sterling is capable of far more, and his career best is in fact 234 FPL points. We won't see those numbers ever again, but Sterling can get to 150 plus if he can start consistently for Chelsea, and we could see a revival under Maresca. But let's wait and see what happens there, because he could become more of a squad player in the next couple of months. Game week 1 against Man City might be decent for him as it's his former club and he's got something to play for there, a bit of added incentive, and game weeks 2 to 8 are fantastic, and we could see Sterling start some of these matches and get multiple goals in maybe 1 or 2 of them with some massive returns and double-digit hauls. It's easy to forget that Marcus Rashford has produced over 100 FPL points on multiple occasions. He even did it last season with only 7 goals, 3 assists and no bonus points whatsoever. But in the season before last, he had his career best with 205. So Rashford has a very high potential, and on his day, he is electrifying with his pace, positioning, and finishing ability. His ownership is currently at 7.1%, and United have good opening fixtures, so I could think of much worse than Marcus Rashford. But at 0.5 million less, you do have Garnacho, whose ceiling does seem a bit high at the moment. He's also much younger, and his trajectory is only on the up, whilst Rashford constantly fluctuates between a great season and a very mediocre one, as we just saw in the recent campaign. But don't discount Marcus Rashford. He isn't completely finished just yet, and he can deliver in the big games with a great record against the top six, including Liverpool, who he faces in Game Week 3. Gabriel Martinelli scored the winner in a 2-1 victory over Man United in a recent preseason friendly. He came off the bench and looked electrifying every time he got on the ball, completed multiple dribbles, and that was more of the Martinelli we know from the season before last. So just a bit like Rashford, he fell off quite considerably in the last campaign, but he's still very young. He has a very high ceiling, and he could be one of the best goal-scoring wingers in the Premier League for years to come. He only got 6 goals and 5 assists in the last season with 46 key passes and 118 FPL points, and the biggest concern is the minutes, and he is quite injury prone, so those two factors make him a bit of a risky pick. But at 7 million, he is worth a punt, especially as your 4th or 5th midfielder, but he's not someone you want to rely on week in, week out, and unless he can stay fit, get 30 plus starts, and displace Trossard at left wing, this might be a very risky pick, and you might want to go for someone else, especially a Saka or Odegaard, who offer much more consistency and FPL points. Diogo Jota has performed well in pre-season, but he hasn't scored or assisted yet, which is quite surprising, and the biggest issue with him is the injury record throughout his time at Liverpool. He just can't stay fit, but if he can get 25 plus starts, I think he could easily get to close to 200 FPL points, or at least 150, and get a decent number of goals with plenty of fantasy assists along the way. His underlying numbers aren't particularly great. 38 shots in the box is okay, I guess, considering the limited minutes and starts, but I don't think his underlying numbers are ever that impressive because he's a clinical player. He doesn't need many minutes or opportunities to make an impact. But keep an eye out for Jota, who at 7.5 million only has 3.6% ownership with some of the best fixtures you could ask for. The final midfielder covered today is James Maddison, who comes in at 7.5 million in price tag. Once again, he was in my very first draft last season in the preliminary one I made, but I haven't really considered him this time round. But if you look at his time at Leicester and his first season at Tottenham, he does have a bit of a pattern where the first part of the season he looks amazing, gets goals and assists on a consistent basis, then he picks up an injury, and in the final third of the season he doesn't really come back the same, and it takes him quite some time to get back into the mojo and full swing. So let's see if Maddison can break that cycle, because he's a quality player and he creates so many chances. 67 in the limited game time he had is impressive, with 11 assists, 4 goals and 117 FPL points. But just like Martinelli and also Diogo Jota, who I just covered, these players are fairly injury prone, and unless they can stay fit and get a lot of game time, they could end up being quite disappointing by the end of the season. Rodrigo Muniz is a Premier League Player of the Month winner, and he comes in at 6 million price tag now after impressing in certain games, and he did very well in the absence of Raul Jimenez. He scored 9 times, got 2 assists, and had some very impressive stats like 67 shots inside the box, 97 FPL points, and I could easily see him bettering that by starting from the get-go in Game Week 1. And with the signing of Smith Rowe, I think that only improves Muniz's chances of getting more goals, as another creative source just behind him can link up with Muniz and provide even more opportunities for the Brazilian striker, who comes in at 6.8% ownership, 6 million price tag, and some good opening fixtures. So he might not be my favourite pick, and I think for the first 3 game weeks, Chris Wood is an even better option, but Muniz is just outside the top 15 forwards in FPL. Dominic Calvert-Lewin scored a penalty in a 3-0 win over Preston North End, and he has a track record of doing very well in the Premier League, but he has been injured a lot in recent seasons, and that's always held him back from reaching his full potential. But in front of goal, he can be one of the most lethal in terms of heading the ball from any Premier League player. He scored 7 times last season with 3 assists, 21 big chances, was quite impressive considering he only started 26 games, and if he can get more game time, stay fit, I think Calvert-Lewin could offer excellent value at 6 million, and he still managed to get over 100 FPL points. His career best was 165 in the 2020-2021 Premier League season, where I had him for a few game weeks of that campaign as well. The opening 4 fixtures aren't that good, but looking beyond until game week 14, which basically stems until December, Everton have one of the best fixture runs you can ask for, and Calvert-Lewin could be the very best way of covering the Toffees offensively. With Rasmus Højlund injured for 6 weeks, that opens the door for Xerxes to start up front for Man United in game week 1, and they have some good fixtures to kickstart this campaign. But Xerxes is a bit of an unknown, a rogue pick, a wild card almost, and that's why I'd wait and see first before investing in Xerxes or most of these Man United attackers. I think Bruno Fernandes, Rashford and Garnacho would be exceptions to that rule, but even Xerxes, who would be next in line for me, alongside Højlund of course once he's fit, I wouldn't really be too keen on Man United assets in general, so I'd be a bit cautious with these picks. He did score 11 times for Bologna last season in Serie A with 4 assists, an XG figure of 9.01 and 11 big chance created. His hold-up play and the link-up can be a great asset for the Red Devils, but I wouldn't invest in Xerxes just yet. The final differential covered in today's video and podcast is Füllkrug, who has just been added to FPL with a 7 million price tag and an ownership figure of 0.2% at the time of this recording. By the time you watch this video and podcast, it will probably be far higher, but it's still going to be far less than 10%, so he's still a mega differential to consider for your FPL teams. He got 12 goals and 8 assists for Borussia Dortmund in the Bundesliga last season with an XG figure of 12.86 and 13 big chances missed. He makes himself a nuisance for opposition defenders. He's good in the air, and he also has a terrific finish on him when he's in the mood. And for Germany, he got 2 goals at the Euro tournament, including a stunning goal against Scotland in the opener back in match day 1. It seems like such a long time ago now, but Füllkrug's opening fixtures for West Ham are dreadful, and that's enough to put most FPL managers off. And the signing of Füllkrug also diminishes the possibility of Jarrod Bowen playing as a lone striker, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I personally believe Bowen is a better asset when he's playing as a winger, particularly on the right hand side. But you could actually see a lot of goals and assists, and West Ham having a very strong attacking force with Lucas Paqueta, Kudus, Bowen and Füllkrug. You've got different qualities from these players, and they could gel very well together from game week 1. Another category has been chalked off with the best differentials ahead of the new FPL season all covered, and you might be thinking, where is this player or that player? Some of them might have been covered in the best budget players video and podcast, because these two categories do intertwine, and that's only natural. Players to avoid will also be on the horizon. The same goes for rating your teams. If you want to be a part of that, then follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below so you can send in your teams as an image or perhaps even through text, and I'll see what I can do with that as well. But thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's try to get this video to 200 likes, and let's keep on pushing towards 35 subscribers and beyond. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below for my Patreon, the Championships Discord server, FPL League, and Draft Hound. All of that is there. The same goes for my Spotify. Leave a 5-star review on my podcast. It goes a long way to support my channel. I wish you all the best of luck for Game Week 1 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.